For fellow art rebels who want to imagine new worlds, Revolution Art Society is a monthly newsletter and podcast that dives deep into the ideas, experiences, and people inhabiting the cracks in the establishment. Join artist and mother Maya Mackrandilal as she explores enticing new ways of looking at the world and engages in conversations with creators of all kinds.
Welcome, everyone. As usual, thank you for your time and attention. I am joined today by Carolyn Castaño. She is a Los Angeles-based artist whose work in painting, drawing, video, and mixed media installations has been exhibited both nationally and internationally. She is a recipient of the Joan Mitchell Foundation Grant for Painters and Sculptors, the California Community Foundation Getty Fellow Mid-Career Grant, and the City of Los Angeles Individual Artists Grant. And aside from being an art powerhouse, she is also the mother of 2 boys. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining me on my podcast, Revolution Art Society. And I'm really excited to hear from you today and to have this conversation because it's, I'm in the middle of grappling with this and looking forward to hearing your perspective. And so I think there are 2 main sort of buckets of the conversation that I was thinking about. So the first one I was thinking about was the messages that we receive around being a parent, but I think in particular a mother and an artist, like from the art world, from the institutions. And then I'd like to talk about maybe like the reality of what that's like and hopefully, like the positives of being a mother, like how that it's actually enriching. I guess I'm coming from it that, I received a lot of negative messages and then also realizing that there's this whole other side in which it's just such a transformative and important experience. And almost being mad at my past self for almost giving into the messages about basically that you shouldn't be a parent. And I just wanted to give 2 examples, at the start, and then you can share. The first one was when I was in undergrad. This was like a distinguished major seminar, and we were just looking at this what's it called, like a documentary about Julian Schnabel, and his kids were like in this field with him, and he was painting. And my professor was like, "Oh, artists shouldn't have kids," just like that, and then just like moved on. And then, there's been stuff, about kind of as bookends. I think it was the first time I heard someone say something like that. And then just recently, I was talking to a young artist, and she had been working with this gallerist who is kind of presents themselves as a feminist gallerist. And she basically said about this other artist, like, "Oh, she had a baby. She's like ruined her art career." So it's just continual, messaging that I think women in particular receive. And yeah, so I just wanted to, hear from you, like if you had similar experiences and if like how you feel like that sort of affects like your career as a mother and an artist.
Well, thank you, Maya, for inviting me to participate in this podcast, and I'm excited to be here and hopefully share, a little bit about my experience. So my experience, I think when, I became a mom a little bit on the older side, and just as a young artist and college student, I just knew that I wanted to kind of live it up, like travel and make art and not really get married or have a kid until I was kind of got it out of my system, or I was ready, like I had finished school. And so that's what I did. And, I'm not going to lie, it was great, to have that freedom. But I also knew that I wanted to have children, and I just, was hoping to meet the right person to do it with. And I was like, well, maybe I'll do it by myself, but that seems hard. I kind of grew up thinking that like women could do it all, and sort of that I could have a career, and that I could have a great feminist marriage, and that I could have a kid or kids and still be a feminist and still have it all. And so I just always thought that I would do it all if I would try to. And so, then it is hard. So then, life happened, and I didn't necessarily meet like the person to do it with, like when I wanted to. And then I did. But I was in my late 30s, and, there is that biological clock, thing that, you could be 25 and have issues getting pregnant, or you could, be older, and, there's just, it's more like a mathematical thing of like, well, now you're 40 and you're maybe have more of the financial stability, and you've gotten everything out of your system, or you have the right partner to do it with, or you don't need the partner necessarily, but then maybe it's harder to get pregnant, or, now you have to go into in vitro and all of that, which is financially, is like another thing to consider. But anyway, so I in college, I did hear in art school, maybe in grad school, I did hear like, oh, it's hard for women artists to have kids. And if maybe women artists shouldn't have kids. I guess I didn't pay too much attention to it. I did kind of hear from like older women, like who had grown up with that, like especially like in the, 60s and 70s, maybe 80s too, like, who were like, oh, well, I made a choice to have a kid, and I was told not to have a kid at UCLA, or women artists shouldn't have children. And then other kind of colleagues or mentors who are older women artists, when I did have a kid, kind of were like impressed or in awe that I could be teaching, pregnant, 7 months pregnant, walking around the easels teaching, and just like it's just normal. And they were kind of like felt like emotional about it, like, wow, I would have never imagined this moment, and it's amazing. And also being a Latina, that's that's another conversation. But so yeah, and then even from maybe younger women artists, or some artists in my friends who maybe have chosen not to have kids, and they would say things to me. Maybe some are not such close friends, who would say like, I'm never having kids, or my art is more important, and uninvited, like, well, thank you, for your, I value that too, like that confidence and like knowing yourself, because I think as women, we're also sent a lot of messages, like from birth, from our families, from society, like you have to have kids, or if you're going to have a career, don't have kids. I think because I'd waited so long, or I didn't have kids, or really like a serious partner and that my family knew of. I had other people, but they didn't really know them. My family was kind of in shock too, that I had a partner and was suddenly pregnant. And they're like, wow, I never thought that you would be a mom, or how do you like it? I'm like, oh, I love it, and now, I have 2 boys, and I'm a college professor and a working artist, trying to like Gloria Steinem, do it all. But I heard this quote, and I think it's from Gloria Steinem, like, you can do it all, but not at the same time. And I do have to say that is true, like you do need, it is like a mathematical thing, but like anything in life, like you do need support, or support is great from a partner or family, or if you have your own money, like pay for it. And I have been able to hire, I went back to work at 5 months and had, nanny, not a fancy Beverly Hills nanny, but just a senora who would come to my house and take care of the baby while I went to work 3 days a week, and I would be there the other days. And, really does take a village. And my mom is unfortunately too old now to really like help out, which was the old model, or the model in many cultures. So and then my husband is very supportive and would, when I've had to go out of town for an art exhibition, takes care of the kids, or we split the household labor. I mean, 50-50 or 60-40. I mean,
Yeah, I know that.
have more about that, Next question, please.
Well, I think before we go on to the sort of second part, I think you touched on this a little bit, but I just been really thinking about like where this idea that like artists shouldn't be parents, or that you're like ruining your art career, or that somehow I think so I think one of the fears that I had going in was people tell you, that you when you become a mother, like your whole brain changes. And so I think that's like a scary thing to think about, but I'm now realizing is actually like an opportunity. But I think my fear was that, I have so much going on, and then I knew that like a child would be this like incredible responsibility. And I was just afraid that like my art would sort of fall away. And I think that was just like this message I kept getting was like, you won't be able to prioritize your art anymore. And what I've found is just that I have this like deeper commitment to my creativity, and it seems so much more like precious to me. Maybe because like you have to like really fight for the time for it right now. And I just feel like that is just not. And so another thing, like right when I was pregnant, and I articulated this in like a hysteric curators meeting, and Mariana said, like, don't worry, you just become like more laser focused, like when you do have the time. And I think that that's really true. And I just felt like I just did like nobody, there was like this sort of negative like portrayal. Or the other thing I noticed is I'd be reading an article about like an artist I really admired, and all of a sudden they'd be like, oh, and they did just like sort of mention offhand like their 12-year-old child. And I'm like, wait, I didn't know this person was a mother. And so it's almost like sidelined. And I think there's like it's weird to me, this like relationship that I think the art world has with the idea of motherhood. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts around like where is that coming from, like how can that change? Because it just seems like it's either, oh, don't do it, or people kind of like almost hide that they're mothers, and yeah, it's just something I feel like I've noticed. And maybe that's part of like like as you mentioned, this like larger societal bias. But you always think of the art world as this place where we're like pushing things forward, and like especially like in feminist spaces. So yeah, just wondering if you had any thoughts.
What's can you repeat the question?
Yeah, well, yeah. So just that there seems to be not a lot of discussion around like the positives of like being a mother, or how that can enrich like your life and your practice. And I sometimes feel like there are these like incredible artists that you don't even realize are mothers. And is it like this sort of career strategy decision to sort of keep that in the background, and not have it be part of the conversation? Like, what are your thoughts on those dynamics?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's coming out more. It's coming out in the open, more like the role of kind of being a mother and valuing like motherhood. I mean, I think it still is like this weird, it's this kind of taboo or like unvalued or unexamined, like primary kind of experience of like humanity. And in the art world where we, artists make art about all kinds of important issues and non-issues and jokes and what have you. And but motherhood is still like this, you know, almost like unexplored subject. But I think so much of like women's like interiority is explored, or like now I'm seeing a lot of more talk out in the open about like like menopause and just all kinds of women's issues, right? So I think women artists are making and forefronting or highlighting like the work that they do with their kids, and even men like artist Daniel Gerwin, who's a father and an artist. And I mean, I think like he's curated shows about artists who are parents and involved his kids in his work. And so I think it's just becoming more kind of forefronted more. And so I was reading an article in the LA Times this week with interview with Patty Chang.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just really amazing. And, that she, did a work with her son but that all of her, that so much of her work is about kind of care, right? And and using family or the relationships with family and the body, like breastfeeding and milk and breast milk and, all of those things, even care, like we moved and now my, mom, who's going to be 90 in August, has moved in with us. And so now I'm also, I mean, she has her caregivers, but we're taking care of her. Um, and it's like another person to take care of. But like, I guess these subjects are not that sexy or something.
Well, so it's interesting that you mentioned that article because so the person who wrote that article, Catherine, I think it's Catherine Wagley, she was the editor for my article that I wrote for Momus about learning to look at art with my baby. And she has twins. Like, I think they're around a year old. So I think it's interesting, right? That like she has had this experience and now is like writing about like supporting my essay and editing it and writing about this artist through that lens. And I wonder if there's like some kind of like fear or like resistance that like people have to like approaching like writing about things that way, or I think going back to like this artist telling me that, this gallerist was like, oh, this person is like ruined their career because they like had a baby. That mentality is like so prevalent that strategically people are like, oh, well, I'm not going to like advertise this because then people will think that I'm not serious. I think it again, as you said, like it's so unfortunate, right? Because then so many of like this is huge parts of life, right, that are not being examined, and hopefully it is changing, and that people are being braver around like talking about these issues. But then I also think about, what's coming politically, and like what's going to happen, like how long is this going to last? I don't know if you saw like Shiza Sikandar, she had like that sculpture in Houston and like somebody beheaded it. And there was like this other hypoallergic article about like this other sculpture that was like also beheaded. I just think it's really interesting that like when people are like uncomfortable with these specific depictions of women, they like cut their heads off.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's like an interesting time to to be like having these conversations and also not knowing like where we're going to be going in the next few years.
Well, and you also, what you said about becoming, or that Mariana Pomona said you will become more laser focused. Like I do feel, I mean, that I did become more laser focused with having, when I had my first kid, I would make, made like kind of great or like significant moves in my work that changed my work for all time and improved my work. And I would make what I call kitchen feminist artworks, which were artworks on my kitchen table while everybody, at night when everybody went to sleep, and I could have some quiet time undisturbed, and I could work on, watercolor drawings or what have you. But I would make those, which were small and intimate and, something you make in the kitchen, but I could transform them and make them and to do many other things, like my curtain piece or upholstered furniture or like light boxes. And so my work really grew from that time period and that kind of change in my studio dynamic. And I just think of, our own mothers and just, I mean, my mom wasn't an artist, but just like all of the things that she could do and balance in like her, in a week, in a day, taking care of people, working, this, that, and artist, another job is a job like any job. And so you have to, you can make time for it and prioritize or set time apart. And I mean, maybe things do change sometimes if depending on the, how old your kid is and who else you have around, right? So it isn't always easy, right? It can be hard, but also kids grow up, and eventually they're in school and they're away for 5 hours, 6 hours a day, and so you do get some of your time back.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the kid, the non-reproducers who are like, no, I mean, I feel like it. I don't know. I mean, sometimes, well, I feel like people just see like the baby or the small kids that are screaming and that they're going to be like that forever. And they're not. My oldest, who's 10 now, he's at LA High School for the Arts right now, like being a little artist. And we're going to his first art exhibition,
So cute.
I know. And I'm so excited. And,
Yeah. Oh, and so you mentioned, the change that your like practice went through, like when you had your first child. So do you want to like talk a little bit more about maybe you mentioned like the change in venue, right? That reminds me, like there was always a story like I hung on to Kiki Smith making her first sculptures like on her kitchen table. And so, do you want to maybe talk like a little bit more about, kind of what changed through that process of bringing your practice into this very specific space and time of day, and then probably like a shorter amount of time that you had to work, like because you said that it changed for the better, like in like a fundamental way and for the better. And do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I still had a studio away from home, but, it was harder to get to during this time of like my kid was like a newborn or the first year or so. And so, I had some opportunities come up and so I didn't want to turn them down. And then kind of going back to something you said too about your not wanting to give it up or prioritize. And I felt like this almost intense, desperate need to like prove all the voices wrong.
Yeah.
Almost like an athlete, like. And so I actually made more work. I was like on this adrenaline and at night I would work all the time. I mean, much more than I do now. Like, and so I would, everyone would go to bed. And so then I could set up and, work on applications or for grants or for whatever. And then I would also work on, my practice has centered on a take on landscape, on the landscape. And so I would work on these watercolor mixed media pieces on my kitchen table, which were 20 by 24 kitchen table size. I could work and then put everything away in my little corner. And, nobody, it's like the kitchen mouse. Nobody knew that anything had happened. And so, but it also happened to be around the same time as a lot of digital printing technologies had become kind of consumer friendly, like price wise and accessible. So I figured out that I could make a small drawing that was intimate and quick to do in a night or two. But then I could, that's nice. That's one artwork, but I could give my work more bang for its buck. For my buck. So I could extend its life and make it do different things. So I could take this small drawing, I could photograph it high res and have it printed into a large scale curtain piece for an installation, or I could turn a portrait drawing into a light box artwork. And so now it was like this humble kind of drawing on paper, paper's kind of second class citizen, and to painting or other formats or mediums, I could turn it into a light box. Now it's like, wow, it's like larger than life. And before I had my first kid, the year before I'd done this 1 year, not a 1 year, I wish, a 1 month or 2 month residency in Medellin, Colombia, where I worked with a group of survivors of the armed conflict in Colombia. And I took photographs of they were a group of women, younger women, one was almost like 85 years old, I think, and then younger women who were, maybe the youngest was like 15 or 14. And so I could could use all the material I collected and make drawings. I made portraits of the women. And so then some of those portraits became light boxes. Around that same time, I had the opportunity to have a solo exhibition at the New Americans Museum in San Diego, which is a small museum whose mission is to kind of forefront immigrant stories in the U.S. And so they approached me and came over for a studio visit. And, we had a studio visit and they're like, we love this, we'd love to challenge you to kind of do these other things. And I was like, yeah, I'll do it. And so I had this idea to turn one of my drawings into a wall-to-wall curtain piece. And it was inspired by a Colombian artist named Beatriz Gonzalez, who made this curtain installation in the 80s that's called Decoración de Interiores, or an interior decoration. And she had screen printed an image of the Colombian president at a party singing opera. And it was an image that came out in the newspaper. And the commentary in the newspaper was like, or maybe her commentary was like, wow, while the country had been going through this great strife and economic crisis and crime was high and, all kinds of things, while the country is going through this terrible time, the president is like singing opera in having caviar at a party with a tuxedo on, and the ladies are in the gowns. They're just like a decorative motif, our struggles, and so I was just inspired, and I love that idea of like turning, making a curtain installation, and so I, my nod to Beatriz, and I made my own curtain. And so I made a wall-to-wall landscape inspired by my time with the women in Colombia who had come from the countryside and thinking about the landscape there. So yeah, and so the kind of like the time to think about it at home, when you're sitting breastfeeding and taking care of the little one, making art at night, there's just a lot of time to to be creative for ideas, right? And so I'm like, I could do this, I could do that. It's like, I can't wait to have more time to do all of this. And so, but what was great about the digital technology is what I made at home at night, I could then push a button and, get it made, or take the baby with me to the photo lab or the fabric printers, and then have it made. And so it's kind of, part of the work is thankfully being made by someone else who can, the craftsman or the printer, and then I could take it from there and continue on. So, it just allowed me to see like kind of the possibilities for my work. And I think I'm a little bit like an anxious artist, in that although painting is it's like my home base. Like I feel like I want to do more, or I want to do these other things. So I've made, kind of upholstered furniture with fabric printed using my drawings or paintings. I've made a ceramic sculpture in collaboration with a younger ceramic artist, all kinds of stuff. So it really like kind of freed me up to sort of expand my practice in a way. There was an opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, because this is something I talked about in, my last conversation with Enid was, and, I think everybody's experience, of that transition from like the before times to the after times is very different. But for me, it was a really hard time. But I experienced this. It was the hardest thing I had ever gone through. I described it like what was happening in my body felt like I was in a war, that like a bomb was going to drop on me, like 24/7 for like several months. But that experience also, I think it is like this ego dissolution, which can be scary, right? But then you realize like, the ego is a construct, right? And like I can have this agency over myself. Yeah. And so I feel like I'm still in that space of like, how is it affecting my practice, and what are things going to become? And in a lot of ways, the podcast and like all these other things I'm doing is part of that, of doing things that I've always wanted to do, that I always felt like, oh, well, I can't do that. Like I can't have a podcast, like, or like a real artist doesn't have like an Etsy shop, with like their stuff on t-shirts. And then I'm just going for it, now, opposed to before, where I was like so protective of this idea of an artist that had been sort of given to me. So yeah, like I do feel like it is like such a powerful transformative experience. And I feel like so oftentimes people hear that and like it seems like that's a bad thing. And it's hard. I'm not gonna like lie, but like growth can come out of that, like really powerful growth. And so I'm glad to hear. And it's also just nice to hear more about your practice. Just because like I just know you from like, oh, I go to your shows and like see what's going on. And so it's nice to hear like this deeper history that is sort of tied to those experiences. That's really nice. And so have you made any work specifically around like your experience of being a mother, or do you feel like there's stuff that it's there but maybe not super obvious? Or
not I haven't yet made work about being a mother. I mean, I keep thinking about it, and like things that I'm interested in doing, or kind of more like collaborations with my kids. Like I was in a arts festival last summer called Swept Away, a love letter to an artist and the environment, and so I made a piece kind of channeling Maya, the Afro kind of Christian goddess of the water and the ocean, and I had my kids participate with me. It was at the beach. And so, I mean, it was very like impromptu, and I mean, they were more like having fun with it. So, I mean, I think there's other work that I want to do with them or about them, but I think I've been, just maybe my own sensibility. I'm a little bit proprietary about that space or that quiet time where I work on my work. And so I guess it's like a fantasy. Well, one is working with your kids or collaborating, which is, a certain type of project. And the other kind is making work about motherhood. And yeah, I mean, I think about all of these women artists who've made, like just reading about Patty Chang and her work with her kid, or just about the process of, your body and so many artists. So we'll see, to be determined.
Great. So something to look forward to.
Yeah. Well, I just want to, add too, when you said, oh, it was so hard. It's like an ego. What did you say? Ego dissolve.
Like ego dissolution. Yeah.
Or dissolution. And yeah, I mean, I feel like, on Instagram or social media, or like in these conversations, like we're hearing like all the great part and the triumph of making the work and being able to balance, to do it all. And I read, but it's not always so easy. And, I read an interview with one of Louise Bourgeois' kids, and, talking about her legacy or her work. And the daughter said something like, it wasn't always so easy, or there was a lot of hardship, or there were a lot of tears. And so then that was all that was said, or there was a lot of it was hard or something she said. And so I thought like, oh, like, yeah, was it hard? It was hard for Louise because she had like 5 kids. Was it 5 kids?
Oh, I don't even know how many.
And she basically was making work, but really raising, the kids. Imagine it was just much more traditional because of the age and, her age. And so I'm like, the way the daughter sounded, it was probably hard on the kids because, there is a conflict of like pulling of like where, you can't, it's hard to, I'm sure it was an interior struggle for Louise Bourgeois wanting to make the work and to be, it is a selfish practice, like you're involved with this making and you have this urge. And then now, the kid is crying or they need you or it's home, like very basic things. I had to, I live at Target buying, my kid, we never have it together. The program wants, he has to wear jeans. Like he's outgrown his jeans. Like, oh my God, it's 11 o'clock at night. Where do we get jeans? And the t-shirt's dirty and just a lot of like very human, regular, like mundane bullshit, that we do. And there are tears and days and nights where I'm just like, oh my God, this was a bad idea, like why are we doing this? But then it's like really amazing and like these and really normal. Like I feel like the US, although we have a whole, Christian right that's supposedly for family, but it's not really a culture that loves kids or family or women, or, anyone. I don't know who they love, like men. It's very, but I feel like in other cultures, maybe there's more of a love or respect for women and family and kids.
Yeah, because I think it's like you're supposed to have kids, but they should be invisible, right? They should just like stay in a house and never go anywhere and be noisy or rambunctious or just kids, Yeah, I think that's so true about this country is this weird like discomfort that people have, with like the presence of of children, and not seeing them as like they're part of society and like they're important.
Right.
And they're not just to like be put like in some box somewhere to be like stared at. Like I don't know where they expect these children to go. Yeah, and I think that's like, and you mentioned this, about like, the expectations, right, for these bourgeois. I'm finding that a lot of the struggle is, you talk about the students, like it's this labor, it's this work, but it's not compensated. There's no one is giving you time. Like if somebody mentioned, oh, so like I don't get paid to take care of my child, but if somebody else does it, they get paid, and like if I'm cooking a meal, like I don't get paid, but like if I want someone to do that, I have to pay them. So like we recognize that this labor has value, but it only has value when it's like somebody else doing it, not when, usually the mother is doing it. And that's where like the challenge comes in, right? It's like if this was valued, if it was seen as like, you think about, I don't want to, idealize, but in maybe like an indigenous society, like childcare is part of the work that you do for the community, right? So everybody participates, and it's not seen as like a hobby that you like have taken on your own, that it's like an integral part of the society. And I imagine that there's probably less of that conflict, than in this society where it is treated as like, it's like a duty and something you have to do, but then also something that you get no support with, and you are kind of on your own, and you also have to then also work to make money.
Right.
And that's where the exhaustion and like the conflict comes in, is structural, not really about like the actual experience of being a parent. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like a psychosis. It's something that society's like pushing, but then there's no support for women or for families, like for, like preschool, like, early childhood education or care or health care, or like work-life balance. And so you're expected to do all of these things. And if you're not, then you're like, failing or.
Yeah. And that was like another thing that I felt was like, I always knew that this culture was ridiculous and violent, but you really like experience that like a very visceral way, I think, when you when you become a parent in general, but I think particularly, for mothers, because you are navigating like sort of the capitalism piece and the gender piece, and even, I was saying like even 3 months, I felt like I had just gotten to the place where I didn't feel like I was drowning every day. And then society is like, oh, okay, well now just add like a job on top of how you're feeling. And it was, and like that's a choice, right? That's not like a baked in thing about being a parent. Like that's a choice that our society makes to put women through. And it made me so angry. like the first year I was just like so angry at like the society for like what like I was going through. So yeah, but I think that's then that's an important experience to have, I think, as like a feminist, like want to make work about and like advocate for, is like sometimes you don't like you have to experience something, to really be able to like articulate what's going on and like fight for change. Because I think before I just assumed like, oh, we have 3 months, that must be like an adequate amount of time. And then like that's the fight, right? It's like the fight to just get 3 months, because that's not even like mandated. And it's like,
And so many women have to do this. A woman, at my school, she's pregnant at school, where a baby shower, and then she was away for 3 months, which went flying by. And then she came back to work, and I was like, oh my God. I mean, I would just feel like broken heart, and she's like delivering her baby to like a daycare or baby daycare, like so many women, what we have to do. And I would just be like brokenhearted. Like, here's this precious little human, and it's like taking it away from their mom and putting it with strangers who are, 99% of the time, beautiful, loving people too. And so, like, thank God for them. But, it's still like so hard.
Yeah.
I think, is it in France or Germany where women get a year off?
I think actually a lot of European countries, that's standard. And from what I'm like been reading, from like a developmental point of view, like that's really what's necessary for the child. That it is stressful for them to be away for too long.
Well, I also want to say, I've been guilty of all of this, and it hasn't been perfect, but also like this time, especially like the baby years, I mean, all of it, but, like the baby years or the kid years, like they don't last forever. I feel like sometimes I think like, what was the rush? Or like, you know, leaving, like leaving my baby with the babysitter, or, I mean, it's self-preservation too, and all of that. But when I think about it, it's like, oh, like that time with your baby is so beautiful, and giving into, like, I mean, in a way it's almost like a break from the capitalist pressures of society, where you can just be, I'm holding my arms, in like a cocoon form for the listeners. You can be in that, giving yourself into being in the cocoon, and observe that space and be present in that space, because once it's gone, and they're not going to be there, in 2 years, or, I mean, I put my kids in preschool at 2.5, like, you're going, and and that made sense. But as babies, I feel like, I feel like I was there as much as I could be. And God, it was like the best time. Oh, pushing the stroller down, like around, and I would figure out little games, how to keep my mind, we active, and also take care of them, and also give them stimulation. I mean, I would, ask. Many curators would see me at the museum at 2:00 on, Tuesday or Wednesday, to go see the art, go to all them, go to so many, we would go out, and I'm like, wow, it was like a great adventure. And so it's a beautiful time, so just don't drive yourself crazy, is, and moms to be.
Yeah. Because I think one thing that I do regret is part of my stress was, how am I going to go back to work? Like, how is it possible to like function on no sleep? And, and so I was just constantly worried about that. And there was a point where, I found some Facebook groups around, like, that were like anti-sleep training and stuff like that. And so just like surrendering, like, I think, and realizing like you'll figure it out, right? And worrying about like, like, oh, the baby who doesn't want to be put down to like sleep in his in his crib, the way they keep saying, the pediatrician keeps insisting that like that baby is going to like sleep alone in a crib and not like want to be on you 24/7 and stuff like that.
Well,
It's just like, let go, Well, are there any closing thoughts you'd like to share around being an artist and a mother, kind of concluding our conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, it's really, it's a really great experience, and it's part of it. I think it is part of being an artist, or can be part of being an artist. and it's always evolving and changing. And so, it's not like they're in a fixed state. So the challenges are not always, they're not forever, they change. Then there's new challenges, but I think there's just challenges with being a human and with love and work, with any like family member, or any relationship. But I think, I think it can be really satisfying. And also when you're an artist's parent, you're, in a way, when you're passing on like the art, like language and the way of seeing the world and engaging your kid in through like an artist's lens, it's really like satisfying. So, and like wonderful to see that reciprocity with them. And so give it a shot. Or not.